All right, everyone, welcome to Stable Stories. This is episode 10, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Ria and Ole from Delta, which is a new type of permissionless network. Now, this is going to be, I think, a little bit different of a Stable Stories from the ones we've previously done. For those of you who have watched our episodes before, you know that we host exciting projects in the crypto ecosystem. We've mostly so far hosted projects that are focused on stablecoin infrastructure or applications, but Delta is actually a new type of network altogether. So I think this will be a really fun conversation in the context of thinking about stablecoins and what a new network is thinking about from a stablecoin lens as well. So Ria and Ole, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you for
us.
having us.
Awesome. Well, in terms of the structure of stable stories, we typically start with a little bit of kind of high level context and overview of stablecoins, generally speaking, hear about your experience with them personally, and then we'll dive into Delta and stablecoins from a Delta lens. So, to start, would love to ask you both to share a little bit about your background and your role at Delta, and what specifically was your first time experiencing stablecoins on a personal level, if you can remember that far back. So, Ria, let's start with you.
Cool. Sounds good. I'm Ria. I'm the COO at Delta. I wear a lot of different hats here. I feel like COO is a catch-all term, but everything from operations to go to market to a little bit of product strategy here and there, but work very closely with Ole, obviously. What was the next question?
A little bit about your background before Delta, and then the first time you
Okay,
used
cool.
stablecoins.
Cool. So, bit of background prior to Delta, started my career in traditional finance, covered fintech and payments as a sector on the equity research side at an investment bank. That's actually the angle through which I got excited about crypto. Just saw firsthand studying the industry how convoluted payments is behind the scenes. Even domestically, you have this, four-party intermediary model in between every transaction. And then it gets even more complex when you think about cross-border transactions. So after that, I left traditional finance, went all in on crypto and joined Circle in a sell-side research role. Was there for a bit and then joined Fidelity Digital Assets, similar role there, and then eventually went into the investing side at Castle Island, where we invested at the intersection of traditional finance and crypto. So did a lot of investments into stablecoin infrastructure, kind of all the way through the stablecoin value chain. Also a lot of investments into, traditional financial market at the intersection of crypto. So exchanges, compliance, OTC, all that good stuff. And then I met the Delta team almost 2 years ago at this point and got really excited about the architecture of Delta and some of the ideas around connecting traditional financial systems into crypto systems in a much more seamless first principles way. And, I think a lot of the use cases that we'll get into today are what I was excited about crypto enabling in the first place around payments and just upgrading traditional financial systems with much better plumbing and rails. So that's a little bit on my background. And then first experience with stablecoins was probably paying someone at like a crypto conference abroad who didn't have like Venmo or Cash App or something like that. For the audience, I'm based in the US. Venmo and Cash App are applications that only serve US users. So, when you go to a conference in Europe, as they typically are these days, and you're splitting dinner with someone, like, how do you do it? And stablecoins were a clear use case for that. And at that point, there wasn't like many apps built out around stablecoins, but the fact that you could just spin up a third party wallet and send a transaction to someone else in a non custodial way was eye opening for me. I will say, like, more recently, I just want to give another example. So last summer, we were doing our fundraising process, and we're a Swiss-based company. So and most of our investors are in the US, or our angel investors are kind of dispersed around the world. And, for most of our investments, we were just collecting it through traditional correspondent banking rails. So an investor sends a transaction, they don't know how much money is going to reach the bank account in Switzerland. So because it flows through the correspondent banking system, it goes through, a variety of banks before it reaches the destination, and each of them takes a cut of the transaction, but they don't tell you upfront how much they're going to take. So usually you just send more than you are supposed to and hope that the, amount that reaches the destination is somewhat equivalent to what you're supposed to be sending. And then for some of our angel investors, we accepted stablecoin payments, which we eventually off ramped into our bank account. And that was just so much more seamless, even with off ramping being part of the process. So that's another example.
By the way, to make matters worse, our Swiss bank was like, you need the exact amount. You cannot have like a little bit more or a little bit less. So we have no idea how much money is coming through. At the end of the day, I'm like calling them up every day because you cannot see this online. And I would have to be like, yeah, so what have been like the amounts that have come in since yesterday? And we would have to write down like, this is the investor that is paid in. This is like the amount we've gotten from them. It's some like arbitrary amount. And then at the end of the day, you sit there and you're like, well, actually we've received less money than we're allowed to, and so we cannot actually open the bank account because it's like it has to be exact down to the cent. So that was a great
Wow,
experience.
that is
This
just
is like, part of the operational challenge also of being in Switzerland.
of
It's not
course,
like
but
that
still in
everywhere.
2025, the fact that that's a user experience you have to go through even on the fiat side is just crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
um
Cool. Well, thank you for that
so
rundown, Maria. Yeah, Ole, would love to hear your story.
yeah, so I am the founder and CEO at Delta. My name is Ole. In Norwegian you would say Ole. I probably also accept like 20 other variations of my name being pronounced. Um, so my background is in math. I studied math. I was mostly doing pure math for a lot of it. And just like, this is beautiful, this is nice, I want to do this. And then at some point I thought maybe I should do something a little bit more relevant to the real world, maybe get a job or something. Um, so I looked into ML. It was like it's just not that pretty. It's a lot like you try stuff out. Um, and then I discovered zero knowledge proofs, and that was very cool. It's like the math is pretty. You use like algebra, which is fairly advanced, and you can also do cool stuff with it. So that was essentially my entrance into the space. Was looking into zero knowledge proofs. Now, for the first time, I used stablecoins. I thought about this while Ria was talking, and I think it was actually while I was doing an internship at this Swiss family office, and I was set to do like some data science on some different assets, and they loaded up like a MetaMask for me with USDC to buy NFTs, and it might be that the very first time I used stablecoins was to buy a bored ape.
Amazing. That's a pretty cool story. I haven't heard one quite like that yet, especially for a family office. That's pretty unique.
Yeah, that was fun. To be clear, though, the bored ape was not for myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Love it. Cool. All right. Well, now that we've covered sort of the high level intros and stablecoins, let's start to talk a little bit about Delta. Can one of you just give me the rundown, kind of the 30-second pitch on Delta and what it is?
Yeah, so you take blockchains, you look at them, especially modular blockchains, you look, these things are nice in certain ways. You have separate components that do different things, kind of like a real world system. But then you're like, well, they don't share state. Everything is kind of its own thing. Um, they are all blockchains for whatever reason, and we've taken more of a first principles approach where we say, okay, what are the things that need to be decentralized? What are the things that you need like these super high security requirements for? Where can you, for example, use cryptography so you can centralize things? And what does that system look like? If you just think about, I want this to be usable and useful for the real world that exists today, rather than just like stacking blockchains.
Yeah, I think
Awesome.
one of the core insights was also that there's a lot of things that traditional systems do well, and like we should allow them to continue to do those things well, and rather build a system that plugs into those, that allows you to do things like issue assets, like use, a shared settlement layer, like share state with one another to be able to share assets and identity without being kind of dogmatic about you need to fit this within to like a constrained compute environment.
Yeah. Cool. Love it. And just for those who are listening and trying to characterize where Delta sits, so you guys would call yourselves an L1, yes?
Well, we haven't, but other people have. Like, I think that, so you can call us an L1, right? We're not sitting on top of anyone else. You have
Yeah,
settlement, you have like data availability, as they call it, which is a terrible term, but we'll accept
it
it.
is. Yeah.
But like at its core, we view Delta as not really a blockchain. Like it's kind of a different thing altogether. A very important thing is what Ria mentioned. So in blockchains, you have these execution environments that are essentially made for decentralized systems. So you run some VM, and the whole purpose of this is that you can run like a decentralized system, and you have to make a bunch of sacrifices for that. So the EVM, for example, is built such that you can have many different nodes reach the same deterministic result at the end of the day. Now, we've taken that out and we're saying, well, the existing internet and the existing world has a bunch of systems that are nice. And what about rather than building up a brand new world where you say everything has to live on like my EVM or my SVM or something, we can just allow existing systems to connect to each other and unite them and, share value, share assets in a way that doesn't require them to just say, okay, these millions of lines of code that we've written, actually, we're just going to throw it in the trash and we're going to write smart contracts in Solidity.
Right. Okay, very cool. Very cool. That's a very helpful characterization. And now, if I kind of zoom in a little bit and think about stablecoins specifically, since of course this podcast is called Stable Stories, and so you're building this whole new network built on sort of different principles than some other blockchain systems. You're starting it up from the ground up. As you think about stablecoins, and I know Ria, you and I have talked a lot about stablecoins in the Delta context. What's coming to mind for you guys as you think about building for stablecoin users, and how much are stablecoins sort of in as you work towards launching Delta a main focus for all the things you need to build out and solve for?
Shall I kick this one off?
You can take it first.
Okay, cool. So yeah, very, very important to us. Annika, as you know, I'm very passionate about stablecoins. I think there's a lot of use cases for which stablecoins just unlock significant accessibility and efficiency. But what we have found in going through the idea maze is that there are a lot of use cases for which traditional payment systems work really well. And one of those use cases is domestic payments. So, we've studied real time payment systems around the world, things like PIX, things like UPI, and they have been successful within their domestic contexts. What they're not as successful at is cross-border transactions. So you don't have like a global real-time payment system, right? And I think that's what stablecoins are. When we think about the future and like the role that Delta plays in this world in enabling these types of use cases, we really think about Delta as a piece of infrastructure that connects these disparate systems together. So you can imagine that within domestic payments, you use traditional bank rails, you use credit cards, and maybe you use a very slim aspect of Delta to facilitate those transactions. But then let's say you want to make a cross-border transaction. We kind of envision Delta being able to take a payment that a user makes domestically from their bank account, translate that into stable coins, and then off ramp that into another real time payment system into another part of the world. So that's kind of where we envision today, at least stablecoins playing a role within Delta is to, I think this example of stablecoin sandwich has been used, but really making that seamless and abstracted away from the user and making it feel like, hey, I'm just making this transaction from my bank account using biometric authentication via passkeys.
Like stablecoins are the back end; they're not the front end. And again, we're looking to centralize systems a lot for like what are the things that work well and are good, and where we actually don't want to introduce decentralization because it just makes things strictly worse. And so stablecoins for us are really like, we see it as almost a way to, as Ria was laying out, like orchestrate value transfer between, for example, MSBs or between different financial institutions across the world. They're great for that. We don't want to mess too much with like the existing front ends that exist.
Very
Ole,
cool.
I
Sorry.
just want to highlight one thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about like passkeys and the role that they play in Delta? Because I think it's core to kind of this future that we're describing.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, passkeys are like when you use Face ID or Touch ID to like unlock your phone or log into GitHub or whatever else. And under the hood, it's using just like signature schemes. So technology that's very similar to what you use when you sign your transaction on Ethereum or Solana. But it's strictly tied to your biometrics. So it's very safe because you cannot have this like these phishing attacks where someone takes your private key, or really any other types of attacks. Like the private key is stored there. And the UX is great because you're just scanning your face, using your finger. And we have kind of modified the passkey tech a little bit so that you can use your phone in this way. So I can use, my iPhone to just sign transactions with Face ID on Delta directly, which adds security. It gives you this Apple Pay like UX with everything you do on Delta. And also the security aspect is big. And then there is like a human element of this as well. I can prove that I'm a human because I signed with my face, which I think in many stablecoin scenarios is also a very desirable feature to have, because as we get further and further into stablecoin adoption in the world, the regulatory aspects and who is allowed to pay and is this a human being and have they KYC'd is probably going to play a bigger and bigger role.
Very cool. I love the pragmatism in your responses of just kind of like, let's do stuff on chain where it makes sense to, let's keep existing systems where it makes sense, and kind of the novel approach to sort of connecting both of those two worlds is awesome. I want to double click into one thing you said a little bit earlier, Ole, around centralization being good in certain contexts. And I know that on Delta's website, you've got centralization is good as one of your core principles, which is counter to what a lot of the narrative tends to be in crypto. So can you dive into that a little bit more and just talk about kind of that value of yours and where it comes into play?
Yeah, so decentralization is a security enabling feature. It's something that you say, I need assets to be secure. So if Amazon can come and seize my money, that's actually bad and I don't like that. It's kind of analogous to democracy, right? I'm from Norway, which is great because we have layers and layers of bureaucracy. So nothing bad ever happens because you would have to pass through so many meetings to get anything bad to happen. But at the same time, if you make like, take like Singapore in the 60s and install like a social democratic government, even if you have Lee Kuan Yew at the front, is not really going to be able to do much good. So the way that we view decentralization is that it's like an insurance against really bad things happening. And so the users on Delta should be protected from the worst case scenarios, which is like their assets being seized, or them being censored or something like that. But the issue by putting in decentralization everywhere is that now even the good case, which is the majority of the time, right? Like good case behavior becomes bound by the decentralized aspect. So what we're saying is like, in the case where everything goes well, no one is misbehaving, everyone is happy, do the centralized happy path, which is more efficient, which has better UX and so on. And then if someone is bad, then give the user the downside protection by giving them, a decentralized sort of basis through which they can escape with their funds.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Sorry, go ahead, Rio. Were you going to
100%.
elaborate on
I was
that?
going to say, yeah, like I think Ole encapsulated it really well. We ultimately like don't want to be dogmatic about whether something should be centralized or decentralized. Like it's possible for the spectrum of options to exist on Delta. I think what that enables is competition. And when you have competition, then there's like an alignment of incentives. So even if you do have a centralized platform within this spectrum, because there is competition, you are aligned to do right by your users, because you know that if you don't, then the users have the ability to exit or go somewhere else entirely. And I think that alignment of incentives with this like minimum viable decentralization just gives rise to much more interesting and enriching applications and use cases.
Very cool. And again, bringing this back to stablecoins a little bit, I'm curious, there's of course different models of stablecoins that are out there, from those that are considered to be more centralized to those that are considered to be more decentralized because of their design. Do you guys have any particular opinions on sort of the centralization and decentralization of stablecoins, both generally speaking, as well as, what you might bring in a Delta context?
On like stablecoin models, generally speaking, I think it's interesting. So up until more recently, and even today, you have like two dominant stablecoin issuers that make up the majority of the market. And of course, these are centralized entities that, control the reserves and determine how to manage the reserves of the underlying stablecoin. And I think what's been great to see over the last 18 months, especially, is the like innovation on this model and the emergence of other players. And I think from a regulatory perspective, also, it's been very productive. I think we're increasingly getting guardrails around like what these issuers can and cannot do. They're getting increasingly regulated. So as that's improving, I'm feeling less nervous that, you do have these big entities that control a large amount of reserves. But then you're also getting interesting models like USDG, which is the global dollar, where you have a consortium of issuers where no one single issuer has a lot of power. And that's like a more off-chain version of managing that, a more like on-chain native version. And I think you guys had M0 on Stable Stories recently. Like that's a more on-chain native way to do that, where you still have assets that are fully backed by, reserves in traditional bank accounts, in traditional custodians, but you have a more kind of decentralized issuance model that is managed by smart contracts on chain. So I think it's still early for these like other experiments, like the single issuer model is still dominant. But I think as you're seeing greater regulatory clarity and just validation from players like Stripe, Visa, MasterCard getting involved in the ecosystem, I think you will see a spectrum of models that will allow you to have checks and balances on like being able to use something, once again, going back to like opting into a model that is more centralized if you're comfortable with it, but having alternatives that are more decentralized, like quote unquote decentralized, if you're not comfortable with it.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Yeah, so I think I have a more like high level view on the centralized versus decentralized stablecoins, which is crypto in the beginning started out as this like alternative system, which is fully censorship resistant for everyone. It's like a bad government cannot come and take your money. And I think for those use cases, the decentralized stablecoin, like you want everything to basically be maximally decentralized. But the thing that we're increasingly seeing is that the infrastructure and like stablecoins themselves are super useful within the existing, call it financial order or like the existing world. And so that is also, by the way, where when we say centralization is good, well, it's not so good if like the centralization is like the government of Venezuela and you're like a political opponent, then it's not great. So probably then you would want to run like a decentralized system. And our idea with Delta is that you can do these side by side, so you don't need to have a parallel system, but they can interact. And so for the centralized, like more standard, this is like the existing financial world, then the centralized stablecoins also, like you need it for the regulatory purposes. And that's just how it's going to be, really. That's how it's going to play out.
Yeah, awesome. Love those takes. Love to hear people's perspective because there's so many axes to decentralization for anything, but especially for stablecoins. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out. All right. Well, we are just nearing the top of the hour. Before we wrap up, Ria, Ole, anything else you want to share on stablecoins or any exciting news from Delta? Anything to look out for as you guys move forward? Ria, I'll let you take it since I know Ole's having some audio issues.
Yeah, we've been kind of quiet in terms of what we're working on. I'm excited in the coming weeks to be able to share more about some of the things that we teased in this conversation, specifically around, being able to connect Delta to existing financial systems and enabling applications that are able to tap into what works off chain, as well as use tools and assets that we are issuing on chain. So stay tuned for that.
Love it. And if folks are listening, want to learn more about Delta or find you guys, where can they find you?
Yeah, we're on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at my first name followed by my last name, Ria Bhutoria. I think our Twitter handle is delta.network. And let me find Ole's, like Delta DOT network. And let me find Ole's Twitter handle. I think it's SPJOLEH. So
Nice.
we're typically most active there.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you both again for a fantastic conversation, and I look forward to following what Delta's up to in the future.
Thank you so much for having us, Annika. And I know Ole is having audio issues, but he says thank you as well.
All good. Thanks, guys.